Severe weather that wreaked havoc in many countries has been a wake-up call on the climate crisis. This summer, China has grappled with heat waves for more than 2 months. In South Korea, torrential rains battered the capital Seoul, leaving death and destruction in its wake. Wildfires has scorched parts of the United States and Europe. Global warming has made once rare events more common and intense. G20's Environment and Climate Ministerial meeting is being held today, a chance to double down on climate action goals. So what are the priorities? What could spur the global community to take up urgent action? For answers, I talked to this panel. I'm joined in Beijing, Lu Zhi, professor from the Conservation Biology with Peking University. In London, Isabel Hilton, founder of China Dialogue and also visiting professor at King's College London. In Islamabad, Muhammad Khan, professor and founder from the Department of Environmental Science with International Islamic University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Earlier, we heard the story from associate professor from the U.S. who is fighting, together with his Chinese colleague against the forest fire in Chongqing. But the story is not alone. It's taking place in many other parts of the world. Professor Lu, I understand extreme weather is a big concern now for China this year particularly.
It's all over China, particularly in southern China. Places like Chongqing had encountered many days of above 40 degrees, which have not been recorded since people felt that, when many people joked about, how to cook an egg on the road, on surface of a highway, and many stories like that. And also people observed that newborn birds drop dead because of the heat. So many, not only humans felt the heat wave, but also other living beings, birds, plants, even plants growing at home, you see died out also. So many things happening. People were stunned, but also worried.
It is not just the heat, but also the drought, the floods that are taking place where exactly the heats were, actually, and also in different parts of China, isn't it, Professor Liu?
My friend just came back from the Tibetan plateau, and he worn t-shirts and shorts. When in past years had to wear down jackets. So this year is very, very different. And the witness in past decades witnessed the melting of glaciers, and that caused a flood, especially in summer, flooding and landslides. He observed the landslides right in front of his eyes.
Heartbroken, almost. Professor Khan, I also understand in Pakistan, situation is very severe.
Yes, it's really very, very severe. Although the level of the flood is not that high as it was in 2010. But this time, the disaster is more. And that disaster intensity is because of the mismanagement on part of the governance system and on part of the non-compliance to the land use regulation by the people. They have established their housing within the land, within the river courses. That way destroyed. And there was many encroachment in the upper mountain area. Therefore, the tourist attractions, the big hotels, small lodgings and the guest houses within the river course. Then this flood came in. So and the other thing, in the last 40 years, we have not prepared the water reservoirs that could have minimized the impact of this disaster.
There are different reasons. Yeah, there are different reasons, of course, for what is going on, but also in Europe, Isabel.
Yes, it's pretty much the same pattern. We have a severe drought. We have severe drought here in the UK, but also across Europe. That's everything from energy supplies to food production. And we have severe flooding. So it's still a picture of extremes. And I think it's also worth noting that even where effects are being noted far away from where we live, they are going to affect us. The Arctic is melting. The temperatures in the Arctic are rising 3 times faster than the global average. And the latest predictions for ice melt in the Greenland ice cap are going to deliver severe sea level rise. So even far away from the impacts that we're feeling directly, there are things going on which are coming down the line and will affect us very soon.
Beyond our control, of course, at this moment, but there are many things that we could work on. Now, I understand this is a moment to raise the public awareness about climate change, certainly, because they just see it right in front of their eyes and their lives are being impacted. But even more important is how to now mitigate the danger of this already ongoing change. On that, what have your individual countries been doing? What do you see as the most crucial? Professor Liu from Beijing.
I work a lot with communities on the Tibetan Plateau, and climate adaptation becomes a very realistic issue for those communities, because the grassland, which communities depend on, not only the wildlife depend on, the livestock also depend on, are degrading, partly because of climate. So the rate of declining is faster than before. So this is new to local people too, because large pieces of land become barren. Of course, overgrazing is another concern. Planting grass is a new knowledge to local people. So from education to awareness building to actions to take the process. Now we're working with local communities to grow grass, not only grow grass, but also managing grassland after the grass is grown. In the past, the government has done a lot to grow grass. The problem is after the grass is grown.
Ms. Hilton, of course, in Europe, but you heard and you feel the urgency right around you.
Well, we have many things going on in energy in Europe, as you know, partly as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the question of gas supplies to Europe, and the steep rise in energy prices, which will have the effect of reducing the use of energy, albeit at some personal cost to consumers. But I think that the geopolitical complications they can go 2 ways. You could look at the situation and say, this accentuates the need for a rapid transition to renewable energy. And certainly that is also being said. But it also opens up a rather opportunistic gap for fossil fuel companies to push back and to say, look, you need more gas, you need more oil. And we have just had the rather depressing news in the UK that one of the candidates for our future Prime Minister proposes to license more gas and oil exploration in the North Sea. And that's an example of opportunism. It's not going to do anything to help the immediate energy situation, but it's a sort of crowd-pleasing gesture. So I think it is very important that we demand that our politicians keep their attention on climate change, regardless of the geopolitical complications. And the other thing I think is really important, that we've noted that there's been a very sudden rise in methane emissions. Now, CO2 emissions, as we know, stay in the atmosphere for a long time. Methane emissions are really, really damaging, but they're short term. So we have a chance with methane to buy ourselves some time here, and we desperately need time.
Advocacy is always important, but to Professor Khan, this is a crisis happening right there on your home turf, and you have to deal with 24 hours a day on that. So Professor Khan, to you, what is the most urgent matter in terms of adaptation and mitigation?
In fact, what we started at the government level and the political side is the massive tree plantation that was started more than 5-7 years ago with the name of the Billion Tree Projects. That has to be, I think, once mature, maybe after 5-10 years, then we can see its real results. Secondly, we have started in the big cities to control the urban emission that are contributing to the climate change through global warming into moving from personal to mass transit system. Thirdly, the thermal power plants, whether coal-fired or the gas-burned, they are being replaced by run-of-the-river hydropower projects, particularly in the context of the CPEC plan with China collaboration. 5 run-of-the-river hydropower projects of 39 megawatts, they are in construction, and they are about to be complete by 2025 and production by 26-27. And that will definitely reduce the emissions from the power sector, and from the urban sector, the transforming into the mass transit system, and side by side, massive trees plantation that will mitigate the impact of the climate change.
At this moment, it is happening at a time when the global trust deficit is probably the highest in recent decades. And this certainly dampening the prospect of dealing with climate change together as a world. But how much do you see the mechanism is there in terms of global governance? Governments to governments through international platforms, how much do you see can be done? Isabel.
Well, it's there, but the difference between what happens when China and the United States cooperate and when China and the United States don't cooperate is pretty stark. It was the cooperation that gave us the Paris Agreement, but the declining cooperation since Paris has meant that we're not implementing it properly. So it's very difficult. I can't see a return to cooperation being very easy in the current circumstances. So the best we can hope for is that a race to the top, that they compete. To do better at climate mitigation than each other. Otherwise, we're all just in terrible trouble. So if we can't cooperate, then let's seek to outdo each other in climate action.
We hope that competition, that kind of competition can be taking place, yes. So Professor Khan, but that is not the only thing, right? The other thing is for developing countries, we have been hearing commitment in Paris, in Copenhagen, in several other places, climate change conferences taking place over the past few years. Developed economies trying to provide support to developing countries, and yet those cash never arrived. Recently, we also understand some of the European countries try to organize conferences like that, but the other big developed countries do not want to send their state leaders there, only their representatives. Certainly, you see, it's not at the high priority for those economies and those countries. So how do you see, a very different angle of this international governance? It's not just limited to China, U.S., it seems.
Yes, you're very right. You're very right. In fact, that indicates the level of commitment. The leaders, they are not coming here, they're sending the representatives. And the second thing, whatever is being committed or have been committed in those conferences to provide for the climate change mitigation measures and other things, they have never been fulfilled. So those promises, they have not been fulfilled. So that's why it became like an unfinished agenda for the mitigation of climate change. So that's really a reality, and we have to admit it, that if we make commitment, we have to make commitment, if considering it being as a global village, as a global community, as a one community.
Isabel Hilton, Lu Zhi, and also Mohammed Khan, thank you so much for joining us. All the best.